In the last video, we have seen the recursive trigger problem, where one trigger calls itself recursively and then we end up in a deadlock situation. And this recursive trigger problem is a very practical situation that can happen with any Salesforce org. Because as we have seen, the execution cycle of any DML changes in Salesforce is quite big, and most of these steps can execute your trigger multiple times. So it's very important that we have full control of our trigger logic and avoid any deadlock situation. From this video onwards, we are going to learn some best practices of writing Apex trigger and then how we can avoid these deadlock situations. So right now, if you take a look at our lead trigger, we have 3 automations running on the lead object, and our lead trigger is already having 40 lines of code. But in practical world, you will be having multiple automations running on one single S object, and these automations can be quite complex, and if you write everything in your trigger itself, then your trigger can have thousands and thousands lines of code. So it's never a best practice to write everything inside the trigger itself. We should write our logic in Apex classes and then we should call our Apex classes from the triggers. So in this video, we are going to create a lead trigger handler class and we are going to shift all our logic to the trigger handler class and we are going to call these methods from the trigger itself. So we'll start by creating a new Apex class. And let's name it as lead trigger handler. And this lead trigger handler class will have all the helpful methods that we can call from the lead trigger. So let's go back to our lead trigger and take a look at all the code that we have here. So now we need to shift this logic to our lead trigger handler class. So first I'm going to create a method here. I'm going to give it a return type as void for now. If needed, then we can change the return type later on. And then let's name it before insert operations. Or let's name it before insert handler. We'll decide the parameters later on. For now, just let's create this dummy method. Now let's go back to our lead trigger and I need all of this logic to be shifted to my lead trigger handler class. Let's save this class, and as you can see, we have already got an error on line number 4, and this says that Apex cannot understand the type of this trigger.new because it can be any S object. How Apex will know that it will always be lead type? So what we are going to do, instead of having trigger.new here, I'm going to accept this trigger.new as a parameter in this method. So it will be like list of lead and I'm going to call it new records. Then we can simply copy this parameter and then we can iterate over it. So let's paste our parameter here and then let's try to save our class, and this time we are able to save it successfully. The next step would be calling this method from lead trigger. So I'm going to remove this complete code, and instead of this, I'm going to call my before insert handler method. So let's copy the class name dot the method name, which is before insert handler, and then this method accepts a list of lead record, which we can get as trigger.new in our trigger. And then we can save our lead trigger. So we are able to save our trigger successfully. Now we will do the same thing for after insert and before update as well. So let's create couple more methods in our lead trigger handler class. I'm going to copy this line. Let's name it as after insert handler. And then let's name the third one as before update handler. Now let's copy the code from lead trigger. First I'm going to copy the code of after insert. And then let's copy the code of before update as well. Now let's take a look at after insert handler method. So this method again needs trigger.new, which we can get in this new records parameter, which is a list of lead. So let's copy this one and paste it here. Now let's take a look at before update handler class. And here in this class as well, we need trigger.new, which we are getting as new records in the method parameter. So I'm going to replace it with new records. But if you take a close look at this method, we also need trigger.oldMap as well. So we need to get this as a parameter as well. And as I said in my previous video, the old map and the new map has ID as the key and as object as the value. So now we are going to accept one more parameter, and this will be of type map of ID and lead. And let's call it old records map. Now I can copy this parameter, and instead of using trigger.oldMap, I'm going to paste old records map. So this should be it. Now we should be able to save our class successfully without any error. Let's also format our code. So select the complete code using Command A in Mac and Control A in Windows. And then you can use edit and fix indentation. And then let's save our code again. This is not mandatory, but this makes your code more readable. Now let's go back to our lead trigger because we need to call our method from after insert event as well, and then the before update event as well. So I'm going to copy the class name again, then the method name, which is after insert handler, and this method accepts a list of lead type. So I'm going to pass trigger.new here. Then now we need to call our before update handler. So I'm going to remove it, and then I'm going to use my class again. Let's call our before update handler. You can copy the method name from our class. And this method accepts a list of lead and then a map of ID and lead. So first we are going to pass trigger.new. Then we are going to pass trigger.oldMap. So now our trigger is more readable, and it has only, I guess, 15 lines of code, and our complete logic is shifted to the trigger handler class. In big Salesforce org with a lot of customization, they follow multiple class approach where they have a handler class for trigger, then they have a service class as well. So it's up to you how you design your trigger framework, but at the very least you need to shift your trigger logic to at least a handler class. So now we can test our changes, and we can start by creating a new lead record. Let's click on save, and we should get an error that the industry field cannot be blank. So this means our trigger is executing fine, and you can test it for the update event as well. Now in the next video, we are going to solve the recursive trigger problem, because still if you create a new lead record, let me try it again. Let's give some value in industry field as well, and then let's click on save, and we should still get the recursive trigger problem which says maximum trigger depth exceeded. This means we ended up in a deadlock situation. So we are going to solve this problem in our next video.